So good afternoon and welcome, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be the moderator of this session this afternoon. As you can already guess, I do some research in this area, but it's my pleasure to actually be the glue that binds together a number of interesting talks that we're going to have this afternoon. And for that reason, I'm just going to limit myself to a fairly short introduction. Then I'll introduce our speakers and give you a short overview of what the rules of the game are. I'd like to encourage discussion and questions, so there'll be a couple of opportunities to ask these questions as well. I think many of the speakers already this morning have echoed that many of us are very thankful to be here again. Certainly a big round of thanks to the organizers, to CCDCOE and the CyCon organizers. It's really visionary that they actually put together panels like this and actually bring in speakers that I think all of you are interested in hearing from. And for those of you that are here for the first time or the first time in person, you may not know that there's a lot of competition to get room number 1. And it's relatively rare that a somewhat technical discussion actually gets to have room number 1. So it's very nice to be back here. And of course, for me, moderating as well and listening to the speakers. So before I dive in and introduce the speakers, I'd just like to mention the title of the panel and of course our theme for this year within the conference, Keep Moving. The title of panel is AI, the State of the Myth. I'm not going to give you much more detail about that, but we'll let the speakers elaborate on that. The one thing I would like to emphasize is that artificial intelligence, AI researchers in general, have been viewed by some in the computer science community as being charlatans. For about 55 years, AI researchers have been on the verge of the big breakthroughs that actually bring us true modern artificial intelligence. And I can safely say that I'm currently a believer that we really are on the verge of meaningful advances in that direction, not just with self-driving cars and various other kinds of automated systems that actually make the news very often, but also automation of decision-making and things along those lines. So the reason I mention decision-making is I feel that this is one of the undervalued but extremely important aspects of how we conduct things. So if I were to choose the two single most important things that any living thing does, one of the two would be taking a decision. So decision-making actually at the core of potential successful outcomes, not just within, let's say, a cyber and military context, but also running our careers, running our daily lives, and so on. So taking a decision is extremely important, and we are sort of the product of the accumulation of the various decisions that we make, and we'd like to make high-quality decisions, which means high-quality inputs, and of course, executing on the decisions afterwards. So the decision level, which is considerably higher than data security, information security, eventually takes us up to knowledge security, and that's where decisions get taken and where artificial intelligence sits. And we need to look at how to use artificial intelligence appropriately to augment and provide an audit trail in our decision-making, but also we need to look at security of artificial intelligence systems to make sure that they're not susceptible. So I think the time is now for us to take a look at how to do cybersecurity, in particular knowledge security, decision security, and this is what we can call the high-hanging fruit. Okay, so everyone knows how to deal with the low-hanging fruit. We don't always do it properly, but we now actually just need to start thinking about the high-hanging fruit. And if we're not already thinking about it, we have certainly enough adversaries who are thinking about that kind of thing. So anyway, that functions hopefully as the glue of what we'll be talking about today. As I said, some of my research is interwoven with this, and it relates, of course, to decision security. So I'm going to introduce Emre Halisdemir as our first speaker. He's going to come up in a moment. All of the speakers are coming up to the podium and give their talk. We have Peteris, Paikens, and we have Sampath, Rajapaksha sitting at the end there. And as I said, they'll come up to the podium in a moment. They're going to speak for roughly 20 minutes. We've got 5 minutes to allow for any questions, immediate questions to them. So I'd encourage that if you have something right then. If you have a nice overarching question, we have 10 minutes at the end to stimulate discussion, and hopefully we actually collect enough from the audience. So without further ado, let me please hand it off to Emre. I would strongly encourage you to please read the bios and profiles on the website in the agenda. And I'm not going to read them for you right now, but very interesting people. And take it away, Emre.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. Good afternoon, dear participants. I'm Major Emre Halisdemir. I'm from Turkish Air Force. I've been working in CCDCOE for 2 years as strategy researcher. I'm really quite happy to present our article, Data Quality Problem in AI-Based IDS Studies and a Solution Proposal article. We worked together with my dear friends Mauno Felgas from Estonia, Sambek Cho from South Korea, Hacer Karacan from Turkey, and Thomas Lepik from Estonia. I'd like to start the presentation with the explanation of one of the most important components of cybersecurity architecture, is network intrusion detection systems. These systems have been used to increase the level of network security for many years. The main purpose of this such system is to detect malicious activity in the network traffic. The first IDS studies started in 1980s using expert systems. In the years since, with the increasing level of complexity of the attacks, many machine learning and AI methods have been used in IDS development studies. In the literature review, we saw that deep learning, a type of artificial intelligence, is mostly used in recent publications. From the IDS development perspective, we have to emphasize two important aspects. One of them is dataset, and the other one is model. You can see some of the important publicly available IDS datasets and some models, some techniques that can be used to develop your models on the slide. As mentioned before, model development studies have evolved into AI-based techniques, and we can confidently say that they have proved their success. However, generating IDS datasets with an appropriate quality and quantity of data still remains a problem. Moreover, there are problems in the evaluation, comparison, and implementation of IDSs, mainly because of the lack of appropriate datasets. Most organizational datasets are not publicly available due to reasonable security and privacy concerns. The other public ones do not reflect the current attack trends. Also, many datasets contain imbalanced data and require synthetic data generation techniques to have more balanced training and test datasets. And labeling the attacks is another problem, since many methods only based on IP addresses and MAC addresses and port numbers. There are various publicly available IDS datasets, as I said before, and we chose 6 of them, which have been widely used in IDS development studies. Regardless of their different properties, such as format, size, and attack types, each dataset has uniquely contributed to IDS development studies. However, there are also some criticism of each dataset. For example, although I want to speak about those criticisms now, for instance, although the KDD-COP99 dataset has made significant contributions to IDS development studies in the past, it has been strongly criticized due to its low level of difficulty and the presence of redundant records. It was revised in 2009 to create the NSL-KDD dataset, which is still frequently used in IDS development studies. However, NSL-KDD dataset does not have a normal traffic distribution due to small amount of number of records it contains for some attack types like L2R or R2R attack types, categories actually. Other important datasets is UNSW NB15 was produced in a short period of 31 hours using the traffic generator Perfect Storm. It includes attacks for many attack categories. From the perspective of attack types and dataset size, it can be used effectively in IDS development studies. A disadvantage, however, is that it was produced from a small emulated network. The most important feature of another dataset, UGR16, is that it was generated from a real ISP network produced over a period of 4 months. However, the dataset, which contains both normal and attack traffic, is inevitably quite large compared to other flow-based datasets. Currently, the CICID's 2017 dataset is the most advantageous in that is the most recent these public datasets, but it's already over 5 years old, and the fact it was produced in using a synthetic mesh is a drawback. As I said before, at the beginning of the evaluation of the datasets, that they have served, all the datasets served IDS development studies for many years, and our aim is not slender them here. Our aim is to reveal the deficiencies of publicly available datasets and to make an evaluation in the light of this information. After the evaluations on the datasets, we decided to research ways to benefit from network traffic of the most popular cybersecurity exercise in the world. LuxShield's exercise is an annual live-fire cybersecurity exercise that has been organized by NATO CCDCOE since 2010. In the exercise, blue teams learn and test their skills in many interdisciplinary categories. For instance, defending against real-time cyber attacks, situation assessment, incident response, handling various inject scenarios, and maintaining the functionality of their computer systems. As LS is a defense-oriented exercise, the primary training audience is, of course, the blue teams. Blue teams are required to defend a variety of typical IT systems, as well as specialized industrial control systems. For instance, Linux and Windows servers, Linux and Windows workstations, FreeBSD firewalls, industrial programmable logic controllers, professional power management systems, water treatment plants, air defense systems, and 4G LTE gateways. You can see an example network that the blue teams must defend during the exercise. The red team conducts a variety of escalating attacks from initial access, continuing persistence, and privileged escalation to data collection, exfiltration, and destruction. Due to short time of spent the exercise, the number and the pace of attacks are high compared to any real environment. Attack techniques from prior exercises include exploiting public-facing applications, compromising valid user accounts, exploiting privilege escalation, lateral movement using remote service, data collection and exfiltration from target systems, defacement of websites, and denial of service. After the explanation of the features of LuxShield's datasets, now I want to mention about the dataset generation process a bit. The process starts with the network traffic capture. The network traffic can be captured using different types of network monitoring tools, and additionally, the modern network devices have data collection features, and the data can be captured directly from the network devices as well. But PCAP data collected during the exercise are split into separate files for each blue teams. These blue team specific PCAP files are then shared with the corresponding nation after the exercise has concluded. Therefore, nations can typically analyze their PCAP files to conduct an after-action assessment, improve their defensive techniques, develop novel research, and prepare for the next exercise. However, there is a problem here, and we focused on this problem, actually. This PCAP data may include information that can be used to determine nations' defense tactics, response patterns, and tool sets utilized to defend against various cyber attacks. Therefore, as a precaution, these PCAP files cannot be shared by the countries because it includes some confidential data. The sensitivity of the data basically depends on the possibility to retrieve defense behaviors of the teams. In our study, we propose a method to overcome this problem and generate a publicly available unclassified dataset. Creating a simple unoccupied blue team has already been attempted in past exercise iterations. However, without actual players, this empty team did not achieve the same level of interaction with the red team and user simulation team as the other blue teams. Thus, actual players within a blue team are necessary to create a more realistic dataset. To solve this issue, we introduced the concept of the research team. This team will operate similarly to other teams. However, data captured from this team will be prepared for public release. Initially, the research team will include in the elections exercise and will include volunteers from the nations, and maybe later, within the recent advances and towards autonomous cyber defense techniques, and the future research team should either be a virtual team or at least a hybrid between artificial intelligence defense component and a small number of human players. Sharing PCAP files for any purpose can be challenging due to the large file sizes. This is another problem because processing that data might be a problem for the researchers and the academia. So the entire Lakshya's full packet capture produces approximately 11 terabytes of PCAP data for the 2 days of the exercise. When this PCAP data is split up into individual blue teams, the median size of the data for a single team is about 400 gigabytes. The proposed research team will likely produce a similar amount of network data. This would mean an exceedingly large amount of raw data from various networks of mixed types. Simply providing this large amount of data, as I said, would be a problem for the researchers. Therefore, the published data needs to be more manageable for future research endeavors. We propose to split or filter the data once more by captured network type. For example, according to Lakshya's exercise infrastructure, the data could be split into different collections based on the defined network segments, such as public services, office segment, drone research lab, and power generator network. This will result in several smaller PCAP collections that are less complicated to handle. Since IDS configuration and network defense techniques can differ significantly across public, private, and special purpose networks, this kind of separation would also beneficial for the detection algorithm development studies. When the manageable PCAPs be generated, the pure PCAPs can be shared or a dataset can be produced. We have options for that. We can share the raw PCAP file, or we can work on that PCAP file to generate a new dataset. To generate a more usable dataset, the PCAP files has to be converted to a readable format by developing an application or using open source tools such as Kickflowmeter. Using a PCAP converter basically provides us a more readable PCAP file. The file includes flows with many features, and the number of features can be decreased using various types of feature extraction techniques. You can apply deep learning techniques as well for feature extraction, or manual feature extraction techniques can be used for feature extraction. But for me, the most important part of the IDS dataset generation is labeling. Labeling is a really important aspect of part of this process, because many researchers just only use, as I said before, IP addresses, MAC addresses, and port numbers. However, a red team machine generates also a normal attack traffic and besides malicious attack. So we cannot use those features, we cannot just use those features to label a dataset. Therefore, expert evaluation and log analysis have to be included in the labeling process. In summary, in this study, we firstly examined the properties of 6 datasets, widely used 6 datasets, and we proposed a method to generate a novel and annually available IDS dataset benefiting from the unique environment of Lakshya's exercise. To create an efficient dataset for research, decisions on which subnetwork to choose from the entire exercise infrastructure and how to adjust the attack and normal traffic balance should be made in a sound manner. The anonymity of the data will also need to be evaluated thoroughly prior to publication, and this is going to be a challenging process for us as well. Another important feature of an IDS is attack diversity it contains. The attack types included in the Lakshya's exercise are determined by the red team based on their research carried out each year. Within the scope of the exercise, up-to-date attack types are applied every year. We are sure about that, and the responses from the blue teams to these attacks are measured. The attack categories used by the Lakshya's exercise in past years are presented in this slide, in this table. In conclusion, conducting the exercise every year will ensure that up-to-date attack categories are added and up-to-date infrastructure devices are used. In addition, the fact that the exercise infrastructure is quite extensive will offer several advantages for producing a realistic dataset. There are many different systems with specific network infrastructure in the exercise is so beneficial for research studies, actually. Addressing some of these systems each year will also provide an important opportunity to observe the network behavior of different environments. Furthermore, background traffic generation in the exercise will contribute to the normal traffic distribution. Therefore, the dataset will include a balance of normal and attack traffic. As a result, considering the dataset features and the attack categories of this kind of dataset, it can be expected that a dataset created from a unique infrastructure of Lakshya's exercise will make a significant contribution to IDS development studies carried out in academia and industry. This is the end of my presentation. We are always ready to answer your questions, me and my friends. You can shoot, email anyone, anytime you want. And I'm ready to answer your questions now as well.
Thanks very much, Emre.
Thank you.
Please feel free to stay at the podium while we see if there are questions.
Okay.
So, of course, this is the first round of questions immediately after lunch, so hopefully not too many people have a food coma, and we can encourage some questions directly from the audience. While you think up your question, I don't know if we have the microphone people around, but while you think up your question, let me quickly tie this in with what we're about to hear also from Peteris and later from Sampath. The work that underlies this, done by Emre and his co-authors and co-researchers, is important in the sense that for those of you that don't come from a machine learning, data science, or artificial intelligence background, the need for clean, interesting data that actually reflects the reality of the situation is unbelievably important. And I happen to have worked many years ago for a large company an unnamed company that's unfortunately not a sponsor, but nonetheless, that company developed various kinds of intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems. And these were those so-called rule-based systems, which are not at all based on adaptive technology like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And the opportunities now algorithmically to be able to adapt to various threats is very impressive. But of course, it rests entirely on having good quality data. And of course, that comes with all kinds of interesting privacy challenges. So I think the team is uniquely challenged, but also uniquely positioned to be generating such data. And Locked Shields is probably the single best venue for that, other than collecting data in some, let's say, random other way by sitting in coffee shops and sniffing Wi-Fi. But anyway, nonetheless, let me kick things off with a very short question to Emre, because I don't immediately see hands, but it could be the lights. Jump up if you do have a question. Sorry, we do have one from the front here. So if we can have a microphone for you. I'll come back to mine in a moment.
Hi, John Fernandez. I'm from the U.S. Army Cyber Institute. If I understood correctly, the data that you're generating is coming from a relatively condensed time period and going to have maybe more than what you'd see in an open environment in terms of malicious traffic. So how do you see that then affecting the models you train when that probability distribution might actually be different than the real world?
Yes, our Locked Shields exercise takes almost 2 days, and there are many attack types applied for the red teams. And yes, the time period is so tight, but the attack types and the normal traffic is enough for creating a beneficial data set for these kind of IDS development studies. So, as I said before, we are sharing these PCAP files with the countries, but of course this includes some data that reflects their behaviors for the attacks. So this is the actually main purpose of this.
I think we'll also take a little bit of that along in the discussion at the end of the session, because the issue of very long time signals and having those present enough in the data is an interesting problem, and how to deal with that over short time frames. Do we have another immediate question from the audience? Sorry, Gabor.
Yeah, I got a mic. So you mentioned the feature selection. Does your paper contain the feature selection, the selected features? Are they introduced?
No, actually. Our paper does not contain feature selection process, but we are mentioning about it. As I said before, you can use many type of feature selection algorithms to select the features, effective features. There are some studies, previous studies actually happened on this part. So
thank you, Emre.
We don't mention about it.
We have another question from the middle, close to the aisle.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I'm Ahmed Amro. I'm a PhD at Norwegian University of Science and Technology. So my question is, have you considered the coming trending threat of adversarial machine learning and how it will affect the future intrusion detection system for such malwares that aim to do model poisoning and that they transmit traffic in a network for long time so that it becomes normal and just play within the thresholds of normal to malicious. Have you considered that, and what do you think the ideas toward answering that issue? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's related with labeling the data actually. This is the important part of, as I said during my presentation, labeling the data is the most important part of this study. Our team is working on it with the red team, and we will create some methods for separating malicious data and the normal attack traffic. So we are still working on it, and I will share some information with you.
I think you actually open up a very interesting line of questions that ties back to the need to protect the models, the underlying models, model poisoning, of course, and modern threats that are manipulating decision making and operating over very long timescales. typically are designed, of course, to remain subclinical so that they're essentially undetected over these long time scales. But I think we'll leave it at that for now. Believe me, there will be more questions. So during the continued discussion period, thanks very much, Emre. And I'll immediately call Peteris up to begin his talk. And we have exactly the same format. And I'm sure there are questions that will be overarching, so don't forget to save those additionally for the end. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so nice to see you all here. So I'm here to present, let's say, an overview of how machine learning impacts the security of cyber-physical systems. I'm Peteris Paikens. I'm from University of Latvia Institute of Mathematics and Computer Science, Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and I'm working as mostly machine learning researcher with focus on both natural language processing and also on cybersecurity. So my agenda today is essentially three topics. One is applications of machine learning to mitigate threats, the blue team approach. The second part would be machine learning applications to find the threats, which is more like red team approach. And third part is probably more interesting in recent research, various threats to the machine learning systems themselves. So the context of cyber-physical systems is all these software systems which directly interact with our physical reality. The most popular approaches seen in media, at least, are consumer automation, all the smart home and Internet of Things technologies, and the less seen approaches are those used in industrial systems. Industrial automation and industrial control systems are a big part of our critical infrastructure, and those are cyber-physical systems that matter a lot for, let's say, recent state-based attacks. And there are also emerging technologies like personal wearables, health monitoring systems, autonomous driving, and all kinds of other increased integration of cyber technology into our physical reality. So looking at applications of machine learning, which we are seeing in the industrial aspect, like Emre just presented a nice talk about the, let's say, mainstream application of machine learning in threat mitigation in intrusion detection systems in, let's say, normal IT networks. But there are also very important networks which are the operation technology networks, the industrial networks on which the cyber-physical infrastructure runs. And it's technically uses similar technologies. However, conceptually, it's quite different in the way how machine learning can be applied, how intrusion detection should be made for those networks. The big reason for machine learning in IT intrusion detection systems is that new things come in all the time, every day in any large organization. And only machine learning systems currently are used to be able to adapt to all these changes and detect novel threats and also not detect novel benign behavior. However, operational technology networks are a bit different. They are predictable, they change rarely, and here the application of machine learning, sometimes perhaps it's over-exaggerated in my opinion, because when an industrial system changes, it's a relatively rare event. You can solve intrusion detection in certain aspects by very strict rule-based whitelisting, because you implement a system, you know what traffic should be there, and it should not just randomly change from day to day. So the big question there is maintaining a machine learning intrusion detection system simpler or more difficult than maintaining a rule-based system that tackles intrusion detection. However, a big application of machine learning in those industrial networks is detecting unusual physical scenarios and anomalies, raising alerts about an unexpected, unusual event, which sometimes will be caused by an accident, but sometimes will be caused by malicious action, and then can be used to inform people and raise alerts. The second major application of machine learning in detecting threats is in various app ecosystems. In many cases, we have like app stores for our smartphones, smartwatches, sometimes smart home devices like Alexa skills and so on, where people are offering third-party applications which are totally untrusted but should be trusted because people, consumers, interact with them. And one of the major applications of machine learning here is detecting abuse of sensitive permissions, privileges, and analysis of those third-party applications by machine learning approaches. Because current testing, which is done by, let's say, often rule-based scanning and sometimes manual verification, which is rare because it takes time and resources. But machine learning can be very useful in detecting variations of known malware and implants because, the attackers may create many new applications for each attack, but they want to reuse their software infrastructure and code, but with small variations. And that can be detected with machine learning systems quite well. And the next part is the consumer aspect. Like, again, continuing on the topic for intrusion detection systems in corporate networks, we can treat smart home attacks as a special case of network intrusion detection systems. But again, I'd like to perhaps point out some skepticism towards application of machine learning here, because current machine learning approaches are quite good at interpolation between known data that we see, and they are not yet quite good at extrapolation to novel scenarios. And consumer scenarios, consumer environments in smart home often do have novel behaviors that's perfectly good. Some person bought a completely new device that was just released yesterday, and they want to plug it in, and they want it to work and not raise any alarms. And that should be expected. And in a home environment, there's much less tolerance to false positives. Like in normal intrusion detection systems, the major problem is false positives and reacting them and filtering them. And in a home environment, false positives are essentially a disaster because there's no one to look at them. So, in my view, I have seen lots of research about machine learning applications to smart home intrusion detection, but I would say that it's an interesting research problem which is not yet sufficiently mature for consumer applications. Another approach of applying machine learning is to try and find vulnerabilities before they can be used for actual malicious acts. This is a topic that I've been researching myself recently. We are looking at wireless protocol security vulnerabilities. For example, common Bluetooth devices have all kinds of interesting firmware vulnerabilities in them, and those are quite interesting from a security perspective, because those small devices, wearable devices with Bluetooth chips in them, often, unlike software on your computer, it's quite hard or even impossible to distribute updates to them. Sometimes the vendors don't want to support those devices, and sometimes the device simply does not support any update mechanism at all, because you have your headphones. How would you update the software on your headphones? Like, there's no mechanism designed for such features. And a big problem there is that existing quality assurance processes and certification processes, they test for compliance with standards in proper reaction to other standards compliant devices. However, these standard certifications, they do not test for malicious data, for harmful data that's intentionally wrong. So you can have a Bluetooth device pass all the certification and be expected that it works properly. However, the standard suite does not cover all the malicious scenarios, and so a compliant device can be broken or buggy despite the certification in response to non-compliant malicious data. And another important aspect is that all these firmware vulnerabilities in Bluetooth is just one example, Wi-Fi is another, and there are other interesting firmware in your computers. Modern devices are essentially distributed network of computers in a single device. If you have an iPhone, then the Bluetooth chip is a separate processor with a separate logic that even if the iPhone is turned off, the Bluetooth chip can be powered and can execute malicious activities on it. So these firmware vulnerabilities are very interesting from the security perspective because they can circumvent usual operating system security measures because they are separate hardware that can sometimes have write access to the system memory and just break all the security assumptions of the core operating system. So we are working, and this is not yet a proper result to present on its own, but we are working again on a different data set to improve machine learning approaches for this wireless protocol testing. We have an ongoing project to develop methodology for gathering data and build a data set for these wireless protocol communications of wearable devices for this machine learning applications. And we are looking at, again, just as Emre wanted to capture the whole network data so that it's properly used for all kinds of machine learning applications where you just don't just take the network flow data and some limited features, but you have all the raw data available to improve new methods. We want to do the same for wireless communication. And the problem there is that capturing raw radio data on this scale is not trivial if we want to enable hardware fingerprinting and, let's say, timing-based physical layer attacks. Then we need to essentially capture large quantities of raw radio data, which is technically challenging. But we hope to have some interesting results to present soon. So, the next approach to this vulnerability detection by machine learning, how would this data set be used essentially, is to improve the process of quality assurance by vendors. So we all know that current state of security in smart devices, the Internet of Things, is not as good as we would like. And of course, the main reason is lack of motivation by hardware vendors to focus on security because it's expensive and time-consuming, and consumers are not willing to pay much for extra security, which might be solved by legal solutions like regulation and liability measures. However, from the technical perspective, a part of the saying why it's not as good security as we would like is because of, in my opinion, lack of tooling. Like, we had lots of security challenges for traditional desktop and server-based software. And we have mitigated many types of these vulnerabilities, whole classes of them, by various safeguards, like in operating systems, application isolation, process isolation, hardware changes, and memory-safe languages. And in embedded world, it's not as applied yet for all kinds of practical reasons. And also the process of development practices lag behind the other IT domains. So we would like to help the vendors make security testing more easier. And this is one way how machine learning can help them test their software better. So if we can provide machine learning-driven fuzzing tools or source code analysis that are able to identify such vulnerabilities in a way that's relatively simple and cheap to use, then we can hope that the vendors would apply them and make their smart devices not only smart, but also secure. So coming to the second part of my talk, the threats to machine learning systems themselves. not applying machine learning to solve security problems, but the security problems which are caused by machine learning. So the biggest part in current research are adversarial attacks. So by adversarial attack, I mean some kind of, if you have machine learning systems that's designed to classify, to give an answer or a decision, an adversarial attack would be some kind of input that tricks the system into making a different decision that it should make. And that's a known issue, because by default, machine learning models are not really robust to malicious input. We have some kind of theoretical guarantees to accuracy of data, which is somewhat within the distribution of the data on which it was trained. But if you have data that is wildly unexpected out of distribution, then current methods don't really provide any guarantees about system behavior to seeing such out-of-sample novel data. And it's not usually a big problem in most applications because such data does not appear in practice. However, a malicious attacker can introduce such data if they really want to. And there is a lot of interesting research, both recent and quite old already, that we have lots of methods and publications on these methods, how to make these malicious adversarial inputs. So that has been a focus of research for quite some time, and there's a large body of research on how to make these adversarial inputs in a way that they are less detectable to humans, that look similar to normal input and so on. And so that's a real concern. Those adversarial attacks are possible. And while many of those attacks are, let's say, white box attacks, where an attacker has knowledge of your machine learning model, how it's built, how it's structured, perhaps the model data itself, it's not really necessary. There are lots of publications on how to make those attacks with just black box access to the model. You make, let's say, 1,000 queries to a classification model, and you are able to make a malicious input that will cheat the model somehow. And an observation that I'm seeing in all these papers is they usually offer actual defenses. Like, these are not papers for attackers. They are also researchers who try to improve security. They suggest defenses, how the models could be made more robust. But then I go back to practice, how people make systems in, for example, natural language processing. Well, people do not really apply those defenses because, again, it's extra work, and if it's not mandatory, then people are skipping those defenses. So that's a problem for the whole industry in some sense. And some examples of those adversarial attacks to place them into a better context. Lots of research has been done in adversarial attacks for object detection in computer vision. A popular application of computer vision is in self-driving cars. So you have a system that tries to analyze street signs, and there are all kinds of interesting attacks on how an attacker can make a street sign that's going to be misclassified as an entirely different street sign or ignored, or how to make road marks that will look normal to human, but a self-driving car will see them as road turning in a different direction, so it would trick the car into going off-road. So again, some real impact to physical security. And the same or similar attacks are possible for LiDAR sensors, not only to visual attacks, but all these radar and LiDAR sensors on self-driving cars. And we have also seen similar attacks for essentially every domain where machine learning is applied. Face detection, textual analysis for toxic comment detection, all those topics where classifiers are used, there are ways to make adversarial examples for them. A second big class of vulnerabilities of machine learning systems is poisoning of continuous learning systems. Many, let's say, industrial or practical applications of machine learning try to use a continuous learning system to have it adapt continuously to new data. This was also asked as a question after the previous talk. And the problem with this is really that machine learning systems can learn all kinds of arbitrary associations, and as soon as an attacker is able to control data that will be used by the system as training data afterwards, an attacker can influence the system to artificially create an association that will, let's say, that can later be used to disguise malicious traffic or malicious data as something benign and circumvent some protections. So yes, that's a big question. How do we know what is normal for the system? Like if we train a network intrusion detection system on a corporate network that has undetected attacker with cobalt strike beacons in them, then the system will learn that cobalt strike beacons are a normal part of this network and should not be detected. And yeah. And the third class of vulnerabilities machine learning system are intentional backdoors. Just as an attacker can poison data of your system, you often will be used systems built by someone else, and system developer can make a system with backdoors that are hard or impossible to detect. In essence, they can make machine learning systems that will perform accurately for almost all cases. But if let's say, a secret password in a broad sense, in an image analysis system, the password would be some interesting trigger of pixels. In the presence of a trigger, the behavior of the system is completely opposite. So such systems are, again, possible to design. It's well known how to design them. And the big issue is that it may not be detectable until after it's used. Like, there's very recent research suggesting that there may be methods to make it completely undetectable. It's perhaps needs some verification still, but in any case, it's a big danger. And even if you trust the system developer, they may have malicious insider, they may have attacker in their network, and they may be simply using data sources made by someone else or gathered from the internet that have been poisoned by a smart attacker. So the risk of backdoors is something that, in my opinion, needs more attention from the machine learning community. And again, example use cases for such attacks are essentially every security-related machine learning system that, if its backdoor, can simply remove its protections. Intrusion detection system can be backdoor to allow malicious traffic. Video surveillance system may not detect people if they are, let's say, carrying a certain visual trigger, and so on and so on. All those aspects have their own separate risks. And are these risks practical? And in my opinion, not yet, because first, we are still seeing quite limited adoption, actual adoption of machine learning systems. If we look at vendors who are advertising their machine learning-based systems, some of them are not really using machine learning much, but just advertising them. The biggest part is that those backdoors, they don't, in my opinion, have a direct financial motivation for attackers, because we're seeing lots of attacks which are essentially motivated by cybercrime, ransomware, ability to steal money. And those backdoor attacks, they are not as useful for their level of difficulty for a financially motivated attacker. However, in the context of this conference, such backdoor attacks can be quite relevant for sophisticated attackers who want to influence, let's say, state security measures. And also, it's likely to become more relevant in the future. So we, as machine learning industry, not perhaps we as security industry, but more as we as machine learning researchers, need more time to prepare for countering these attacks. And one way to being prepared for these attacks is need for supply chain security. Because currently practically used ML practices often rely on untrusted sources of data. People use all the data they can get because more data is better. And we are using third-party models. We are using combinations of multiple third-party models, and we don't even know who made them. And the same applies for data sources. We use data sources from web scraping for volunteers. And of course, if I'm gathering data from volunteers, an attacker can volunteer to provide me all the data they want. And auditing models is impractical, but perhaps auditing the sources of the data can be practically possible. There's a recent movement for software bill of materials to track all the sources of your software and libraries. Perhaps the same approach should be used for machine learning systems. So to summarize, machine learning systems not only can be used to improve security, but they have their own new types of vulnerabilities, which present new and interesting challenges for this audience. And for adversarial attacks, the researchers have identified all kinds of mitigations which are not widely applied in practice yet. Perhaps there are some parallels with normal security measures as well. The same problem of not applying known things, but it's quite prevalent in machine learning industry. And for backdoor attacks, we don't have yet effective controls. We have some generic mitigations, like the last year's ENISA report suggests all kinds of generic mitigations for such risks, but they are not, let's say, comprehensive and practical yet to be treated as a solution for this problem. So for cyber-physical systems machine learning, it's still buyer beware, test what you have. And a separate point, the last point, is coming back to the first part of this talk. I think there's a great potential for machine learning to be used to improve security by improving vendor quality assurance for those vendors who make all these gadgets and might want to make them more secure. Okay, here are some references for those who will look at it later, and time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peteris. Cool. So we have a moment to allow a couple of questions. We have also, as I said, a time buffer towards the end, so we'll be hearing from Sampath in a moment. Gabor, let me go to you since you have a microphone.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. I really loved it. And I'm not a built-in man. I just have some room for improvement. So the IT usually, or the security in IT usually focuses on the information security, while in OT, we are dealing with process security and safety. And I'm always thinking if we introduce IDSs, for example, intrusion prevention systems, and they filter out, for example, very special pocket, like an emergency stop, that will be a kind of disaster. So don't you think that these solutions will take in front the information security over the process security in the OT?
Well, this is perhaps a different reason why I'm a bit skeptical about application of machine learning in this process security aspect, because if you may have legitimate scenarios that you have in your industrial process that you have planned and scheduled, but you never had actually in practice, because those are like emergency situations, which, you know, you have nuclear reactors that has not been close to exploding yet. So you will not have training data for it for a machine learning system, but you can write a rule-based system to cover those scenarios.
Oh, clear. Thank you very much for an answer.
We have another one from the front row.
Dr. Bloomberg from CERTLV. I have a question. So you mentioned that there is a risk of adversary trying to poison this data, which is used for learning of the machine learning or AI systems. just thinking about, and this is just a question out, what do you think? Would it make sense to create a Guardian or a Sentinel AI systems that can be used to supervise the learning process and identify a malicious intrusion into the learning process by an adversary? I know this is an inception of trying to layer and bringing layers, and adversary will for sure try to figure out the ways on how to interfere with this, but is there any attempt on using an AI to protect the learning of an AI?
I think that would be a nice thing if we knew how to do it. And as far as I'm looking at current research, I think we do not have a good working solution for that yet.
It's a very clever pop culture reference to Inception as well. Yeah, I very much agree with this answer. And I think if you have supervision of other systems, there of course it's known that there will be fixed points that are emergent. So you may get the behavior you want or potentially something completely different. On that note, I think there's one more question, sorry.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm Carly Winkler, I'm from Australia, Australian Strategic Policy Institute. I'm curious as to whether or not you've investigated looking at some of the huge machine learning models that have been developed by a private industry like BERT in the NLP space, and looked at adversarial attacks and whether or not they survive through the refining of those models when they get to be used in practice.
There is research that supports that if you poison a core model like BERT or similar models, that fine-tuning on them will still preserve the malicious properties, so it's a quite real danger. Yeah.
Could view that as a kind of steganography. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll be continuing with the questions, also covering your talk in just a moment in the last section. So thanks again, Peteris, and Sampath. And don't forget to allow us the time.
Good afternoon, all. Since morning, we were talking about keep moving. Now, let me talk about how to keep your moving vehicle secure. That means if you have a modern vehicles, you are in a risk. Let me start this by explaining the complexity of modern vehicles. When it comes to this modern vehicle, there are some softwares which have around 100 million lines of code. And in the near future, it will exceed 200 to 300 million lines of code. And also, there are some systems to support and provide safe, comfortable, and efficient service to its passengers. And also, at the same time, these modern vehicles include electronic control unit, around 100 electronic control unit, to control different functions of the vehicle. As an example, engine control unit control the engine-related functions, whereas the transmission control unit control the transmission-related functions. All these ECUs are interconnected using the different in-vehicle network protocol. Among those in-vehicle network protocol, control area network, or rather CAN bus, is considered as the most widely used in-vehicle network protocol. That's because of different advantages provided by this protocol, such as low cost, speed, lightweight, and robustness. However, despite these advantages, by design, CAN bus is vulnerable to cyber attacks. That's mainly because of no authentication, broadcast domain, no encryption, and ID-based priority. In this image, you can see that in figure 2, the different fields of the CAN data frame. The most important fields are the ID, which is unique for each CU, and also the payload, which contains the actual message which transmitted by the ECU. And also in the figure 3, you can see that how an attacker can access to the in-vehicle network protocol. In there, you can see how ECUs are interconnected to each other using the CAN bus, and attacker can get access through either physical devices like OBD2 port, or more commonly through wireless networks such as Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and cellular network. Then they can launch different, inject different message into the CAN bus and do some changes into your vehicle. And also, intrusion detection systems are there to detect these attacks. However, when it comes to the intrusion detection system for in-vehicle network, there are different challenges. The biggest challenge is lack of knowledge about the CAN data specification. That means we don't know what this data means. This is a kind of a confidential database file for a vehicle manufacturer. Without knowing this specification, it's really hard to come up with a generalizable solution to apply into different vehicles to identify these attacks. The second challenge is, whatever the solution we are come up with, it should be able to operate under computational constrained environment and will be able to detect this attack near time or near real time. And third challenge is applicable for any cybersecurity domain, various type of attack. And the next biggest challenge is the limited attack data availability. Unlike other security domains, to come up with the attack data for a vehicle network, it's risk and cost involved with this experiment. Because of that reason, it's really hard to find the attack data for this domain. First, we did the kind of data analysis to identify what sort of trends are in the CAN data and to identify different patterns. So for this, we use a data set called road data set, which has kind of a realistic attack. Basically, there are two types of attack available in this data set, which is an injection attack or rather fabrication attack, where an attacker injects malicious ID into the CAN bus. And the second type of attack, which is known as the masquerade attack, which is a kind of more sophisticated attack, where an attacker compromises the ECU and stops sending the message from that ECU, and instead attacker sends malicious message through that ECU. Throughout this analysis, our findings were the periodic behavior of CAN ID transmission. You can see in these two images, it has a predefined frequency range to transmit the message. And also, finite set of CAN ID sequences for a fixed window size. That means if we selected the window size such as 10 CAN IDs, then since we have a limited number of ECUs in the vehicle, that means, for example, 100 ECUs, this creates a finite set of sequences for a normal driving behavior. So when there is an attack, both of these properties will change. It will create new CAN ID sequences, as well as it will change the inter-arrival time between the consecutive CAN IDs. So that means we can use these properties to identify these attacks. Now let me explain you the methodology of our model, CAN sent ID, CAN see ID, prediction task. We inspired from one of our previous work, which is the n-gram-based model, where we use the set of past CAN ID to predict the future CAN ID. This is something like next word prediction in a language. You know that in your mobile phone, when you are typing something, it will suggest you the next word. The same logic can be applied into the CAN data as well because of the sequential behavior. But one of the problems with this n-gram model was n-grams are highly inefficient when n increases. So since modern vehicles includes around 100 ECUs, we need to consider more context to predict the next ID. That means for modern vehicle, this model is no longer valid. So, and also there's another inspiration for our model, which is the continuous bag of word model architecture introduced by Google in 2013. In here, what happens is they use the context from the both sides of the word to predict the center word. But the intention of this continuous bag of model architectures in Google is not to predict the center word, but to learn the word vectors which represent the semantic meaning of this relationship of these words. So let me explain you how we can apply this concept into our domain, vehicle domain. Think about a right-hand turn at an intersection of a vehicle. The possible events are X1, activate signal light, and then you deaccelerate to a vehicle. What we want to predict is the next movement. That is a stop in this case. Think about the second case, X2. We give the context from the both sides. That means activate signal light, decelerate, then what we wanted to predict. And next context is accelerate, turn right. Now you can see that when we consider the both cases, in the first case, accelerate would be another option for the third event. But given the accelerate as another context, in the second situation, we can predict it as stop with more confidence. So that means we can easily use this concept into the vehicle network. One of possible limitation would be we have to wait until some message appear to know whether that ID is anomalous or not. But considering the CAN ID message transmission rate, that means for 1 second is 2,500 message, around 2,500 message. It's a very tiny time period. And also security researchers have shown that it requires attacker to continuously inject the message to override the legitimate message. That means even before the attack, still we can use this model to identify different attacks. Now let me explain the model architecture. We have the CAN data streams. We take a window of time t, and within that time t window, we take another sliding window of size n. We input this into our model. The input is the context from the both sides of a word, or ID. What we wanted to predict is the sent ID. So according to the bag of word, continuous bag of architecture, this learns the word embedding when we feed the normal data. And this learns the vectors, word embedding vectors, and then we will send this into the GRU, Gate Array Recurrent Network Unit. The reason is, one of the limitations of the continuous bag of model architecture is, it doesn't consider the order of the words. But when it comes to the scan data, order is highly important. To learn that temporal behavior, we use the Gate Array Recurrent Network Unit. This is a more efficient version of the LSTM network. Next, we use the dropout layer to make the model regularize. And the final output is a dense layer, which is a softmax probability, which is equivalent to the total number of IDs. So then, after we train the model, it will learn the W1, W, and W3 through the backpropagation during the training process. And then we will use another benign data set to identify to calculate the thresholds. We use only the benign data to train our algorithm. One of the limitations, as we've seen, is to not available of the attack data, but in here we only use the benign data, and what we do is we define what is normal. Out of the normal, we consider it as anomalous. In here, we use the separate benign data sets, and we calculate the minimum softmax probability which you observe during the normal driving behavior. And anything below this threshold, we consider as a weak anomaly. In here, you can see that the A, B, C, F, we can consider as the weakly anomaly. At the same time, we use a time-based model as well. Throughout our analysis, we noticed that because of the message injection, it reduced the interarrival time between the malicious IDs. So we learned that minimum and maximum range for an interarrival time for each and every ID, and we will monitor this time as well to identify the weak anomalies. Then we combine these two predictions into ensemble model using an O operator, and then we use the anomaly threshold, which we can define if our window contains 100 messages. If 5 or 6 messages is malicious, weakly anomaly, we can consider that window as anomaly, or rather benign. Then we update the T window, and we continuously do this process. To evaluate our model, as I discussed earlier, we use the road data set, which is kind of a more sophisticated, realistic data set. And also to evaluate the generalization capability of our algorithm, we use 2 more data sets: car hacking data set for intrusion detection system and survival analysis data set for automobile IDS. And when it comes to the road data set, it has 5 types of attack: fuzzing attack, where they injected random IDs and arbitrary payload. They experience wide variety of unexpected behaviors in the vehicle. The second one is correlated signal attack, where they inject false wheel speed values, where they experience stop the car due to the different pairwise wheel speed. Next, max speedometer value, change the byte of payload to maximum value, and they experience display false speedometer values. And there are 2 slightly similar attacks: reverse slide on attack and reverse slide off attack, where as a result of the attack, reverse slide do not reflect what gear the car is using. Apart from the fuzzing attack, all type of 4 other attacks, they have a more sophisticated masquerade attacks as well. First, we want to identify the effect of the context to this model. So we build another model, which we call as CAN NID. That means a CAN next ID prediction. The only difference with our original model is, for this model, we gave the context from the one side of the CAN sequences. Then you can see in the orange color, the you can see the accuracy of the CAN NID model, which we could achieve maximum 60% accuracy to predict the next ID in a benign data set. But using our CAN CID, scent ID prediction, we could achieve 80% of accuracy using for the benign data sets. And also we did the experiment with different word embedding size, and after 50, we could see that accuracy improvement. After 50, we couldn't see any significant improvement. So we keep the 50 as our word embedding size to model lightweight. Here you can see that the performance comparison for the raw data set, we could achieve 100% for a fuzzing attack. And also we used 2 baseline models to compare our model, which is the n-gram model, which I discussed earlier, and a transition metrics-based model, which is more similar to 2 grams-based model, and also the CAN NID, our other variant of the model. And we outperform all of these models, and also achieved around 100% accuracy, except one case for the correlated signal is say 91%. And for the masquerade attack version, that means the more sophisticated type of attack, which is harder to detect, we achieve also 89%, 100%, 99%, and 100% accuracy. And this is the comparison between the time-based model and the GRU-based model. As you can see, GRU model outperformed the time-based model for most of the attack. Only 2 occasions, time-based model outperformed the GRU-based model. But when it comes to the masquerade attack, time-based model almost failed to detect any type of the attack. That's because it doesn't change the interarrival time between the messages. So this is the result for the HCRL dataset. It's 2 datasets, HCRL car hacking dataset and HCRL survival analysis dataset. Still, we outperformed all other 3 models with 99%, 100%, 100%, and 99% accuracy for HCRL CH dataset, and for the HCRL SA dataset, it's 100%, 100%, and 96% accuracy. Accuracy means the fun scores in this case, actually. Next, we did the comparison for the average detection latency, which is another critical important factor for this domain. Simply, in our model, outperform all 3 other models. As I explained earlier, and as we expected, 8-gram took 452 milliseconds to give the prediction for a 100 millisecond window. But our model, CAN CID, just took 10 milliseconds to give the prediction for a 100 millisecond window. 100 millisecond window equally, it was around 250 CAN messages. That means our model capable of processing 250 messages within 10 milliseconds, which is ideal for this computational constrained environment. Next, conclusion and future works. And our ensemble-based model improved the accuracy of the overall accuracy of the individual models of the GRU-based model and the time-based model. And also, this shows that CAN IDS require an ensemble model with optimized model for each specific fields of the CAN ID frame to identify the wide variety of attack. As our future works, we are working on the CAN payload-based model to detect more advanced type of attack in case if the attack does not change any sequence or a timing, which will be a very sophisticated type of attack. And also, we are planning to use the streaming learning. One of the major assumptions of our model is it depends on the normal data. So what should be the normal? So the solution would be what we thought was to continuously train our algorithm with the benign data set, or rather using the normal driving behavior. We deploy our vehicle in a real vehicle, then it should be able to continuously train to learn the normal behavior. And also, we are planning to deploy our IDS into the real vehicle. We have an industry partner, which is called at Horima Maira in UK. They are our industry partner. They have dedicated resources and expert knowledge to get a real vehicle and deploy our model and launch realistic attack. There are no any more data sets or experiment have done to this type of thing to drive the vehicle in a real environment and do the attack. So we are planning to deploy our algorithm and get their support and to test those things as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Sampath. Cool.
feel free to ask any question you may have.
Indeed, a very interesting technical talk befitting of the session in general. So I'd also like to encourage people to ask more general questions right now. I don't want to deprive Sampath of the opportunity to answer questions, but this is a good time to also, as you ask a question, just state for whom the question is. Perhaps it's a broader question. So we have one in the middle in the aisle there. A microphone's coming to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question to the entire panel. How much of the data is generally unencrypted in these modeling sessions or modeling exercises?
Well, let's start with you.
Sorry?
How much of the data is unencrypted that's either processed or used for training?
Actually, it depends. These are the benchmark data set which is available in publicly. For this data set, actually, for as I remember, it's 3 billion rows of the data I used.
And in a normal CAN bus system, the normal live traffic is unencrypted?
Unencrypted, yeah.
Okay. And if I can turn to you, of course, are looking at locked shields. You know, much of the traffic will be encrypted in various ways.
Exactly, yeah. Some of the data will be encrypted, but generally we are going to be able to use that data.
And presumably a lot of what you really want to train on is the unencrypted header and footer of or trail of the packets. It's not necessarily the content, but who it's going from and to. Peteris?
Yeah, so encryption is an interesting aspect because, again, in this wireless security research, like all the traffic is encrypted, and that's a big challenge for detecting attacks because, if you can't listen to the actual contents, then you can't detect them from the side. So it's a challenge.
Very true. Okay, thank you. Another question? Yes, sorry. Microphone coming to you as well.
My question goes to all of you, and it addresses the complaints about the lack of supply chain security. European legislation includes the Cybersecurity Act. Cybersecurity Act addresses certification schemes for software, for processes, and for services. To which extent have you embraced this idea of certification schemes for artificial intelligence artifacts in terms of securing them? And to give a better understanding, certification doesn't say we guarantee that we would be protected, but it comes with obligations of informing about discovered vulnerabilities once the thing is out, warning, and the obligation to update. And while you maintain business secrets, that's also what you addressed, explain or give warnings to the users sufficient to ensure their level of security as users or as subsequents in the supply chain. Thank you.
Very nice question. Thanks very much. And in fact, I'll ask Peteris to maybe go first.
Okay. So in my view, it would be very useful, this certification, to essentially track provenance of your parts of the systems that you are using. And again, like legislation is probably the proper solution to motivate organizations to do it, because otherwise it's treated as a concern that does not directly benefit the organization and extra work. So, but if it's required, then it will be done. And for machine learning, the current problem perhaps is that we don't have this infrastructure of vulnerability tracking, and we don't have this, like for software vulnerabilities, when library has vulnerability, all this notification of all the downstream recipients, but we probably will have sometime soon. And as soon as we will have the first major incident, then this provenance will be very important to actually track all the different people who are using this vulnerable model.
Any other comments from our panelists, or because otherwise I'll just add something to it's a very interesting question, and I think one of the things that's sort of overlooked is, unlike many other previous endeavors in engineering, we're now at a point where we actually are shipping self-modifying systems that are continually adapting, and this of course fights against, you know, the notion that the original manufacturer should have any insight or control over the potential behavior in the field. And I think there's an additional question that maybe ties into Sampath, and that is whether we're devoting enough additional computing power and resources after the fact. You said already that there's a computationally constrained environment.
Yeah.
Do you find that there's enough extra computing power to solve security problems, or is everyone being too cheap?
Yeah, when it comes to the vehicles, actually, when it comes to edge computing, that's a main issue. We have the limited resource. The solution would be actually we can deploy our algorithm in a cloud. Again, we will have then security issues. As a solution, we can use the federated learning to address that issue, or we can use the edge computing or tiny ML techniques to handle that issue.
Nice. I'm mindful that we've only touched on a possible answer, so we'll engage during the coffee break, I hope. And Thomas, behind you, also for another question.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, and really enjoyed those talks. We heard a lot about how artificial intelligence we use for cyber defense, but wondering if you have any comments on how AI machine learning might be utilized by threat actors.
Okay, so we are seeing some, let's say, experimental applications of automated attack generation and automated exploit generation, essentially machine learning guided fuzzing. So in my talk, I mentioned that is a great potential use for end vendors in quality assurance. But of course, the same techniques can be used by potential attackers to find new vulnerabilities in other people's software and devices.
To that, I would add, you know, if you're familiar with genetic programming, it's more or less a forgotten subfield of artificial intelligence, but there's a tremendous toolbox of abilities to hybridize existing malware and of course try them out in a sandbox in an evolutionary fashion. Emre, I don't know if you have something to add to that, because you do see a lot of traffic in what you do.
Yes, of course. The defending part is important, but of course the attack part and offensive part of using artificial intelligence at offensive side is also important. We are working on basically on the defensive side, but we know how to attack and we know how to red team, behaviors. So those behaviors can be easily adapted to artificial intelligence based systems. So those can be used for attack systems.
Very nice question and answers. I think we are running down the clock, so we have time for another short question. Sorry, Neil, I'll ask you. Don't speak too fast, but...
Thank you.
Sorry, there's a microphone coming to you.
Good talks, guys. Thank you very much. Neil from Canada. I have a question related to kind of tying all of yours together. First one was really about lock shields data, let's call that. Really high amount of unique data, which you would not normally see in a really tight cluster. And then the second is all commercial data, which is, again, a really mishmash of mixed behaviors that if we try and use that to normalize, it really makes it really messy. And the third, again, vehicle behaviors, very messy, right? So if we're using that to normalize the data and help commercially built systems, for example, technological systems, to unique home automation systems, to automobile manufacturers, try and create some normal tools to secure these things, capacities to secure these things. How do we convince them to do this when at the end of the day, it's us commercial buyers who want the cheapest, the fastest result on the product on the market as quickly as we can? Really, how do you propose that this would be useful to those companies? that create the product so that we can get a secure product? I don't know if that question is clear enough.
It's a fantastic question. It's a very deep question, and the clock has just run down. It's very carefully posed, and I think it's very good coffee material. Is there anyone who wants to give a short answer? Otherwise, we will leave this for an ongoing discussion.
I can, yeah. So from my point of view, this will happen only if companies are forced to. So regulation or liability, like market forces will force them to take its security seriously if they are liable for the consequences.
Very good. On that note, we're going to close things off. I realize that we're the people that stand between you and coffee and other treats. Before you run out of the room, I'm going to be handing the gifts, and certainly thanks also from CCDCOE and from CyCon to these three excellent speakers. Please applaud for them while I hand these over.